Welcome to the Cool Things Entrepreneurs Do podcast with your host, Tom Singer. In each episode, we explore the interesting lives of business leaders, entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, and others who have a healthy dose of the entrepreneurial spirit. It is time to explore something cool. Now, here is your host, Tom Singer.
Hey, and welcome to another episode of Cool Things Entrepreneurs Do. Thank you so much for pulling your chair up to the Cool Kids table, where twice a week I try to interview some of the coolest people doing really interesting things in the world of entrepreneurship. These could be entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, business leaders, people with a side hustle, or sometimes even people who are intrapreneurs. They have a job, they love their job. They just want to be entrepreneurial in how they go about their day to day. And that is what we do here. If this is the first time you've ever listened, I think this is, episode 343. We're coming up on that magic number of 350 that in my mind means that that's when this show goes crazy. So start telling all your friends to listen right now because they say you have to do 300 of these shows before as a host you're ever going to be comfortable. And at 350, you become world famous. I just made that up, but whatever. Hey, before we get going, I have to thank one of the sponsors of the show, and that is Mix Tiles. You know, if you are on Instagram, you see them advertise all the time. And what they are is those 8x8 tiles where they actually print your Instagram photos for you so that you can hang them on the wall. Let's face it, you put a lot of time into your Instagram. Shouldn't you display it in the real world as well? I'll tell you what. I have used them, and they are fast, and their customer service is awesome. I'm a big fan of Mix Tiles. Check them out at mixtiles.com, or you can find them everywhere on Instagram. So today's guest, we're going to talk a little bit about culture because, you know, even as a solopreneur, I have a little bit of a culture in my company and the way I deal with my clients and the way I deal with vendors. But for those of you who work with more than one person, you have more of a culture even yet. And our guest today is Mike Ganino, and he is the author of the soon-to-be-released, coming out in about a month, the soon-to-be-released Culture for Dummies. Now think about that. Culture for Dummies. They're still putting out the books in the Dummies series, and they still are runaway bestsellers. And my guess is that Culture for Dummies is going to top the charts come May. So, Mike, welcome to Cool Things Entrepreneurs Do.
Thank you for having me. And, you know, speaking of topping the charts, I can't wait till you get to the 350 mark in the next few episodes here. You've had so many fun guests on, like our friend Neen James and a bunch of other folks. So I'm excited to be here, and I'm glad I was able to get in before you were just too big to handle little old me.
It's 242 that's going to be the magic one because people are going to be like, no way, he's got Culture for Dummies. We got to listen to this show. And then they're going to get hooked. They're going to go back and listen to 442 other episodes.
I love it.
And it's all because of you, man. We're going places from here forward. So, you know, I don't like these long bios that people's PR people send and stuff like this. But, you know, if I was to describe you to people, I would say, you know, yeah, you're a speaker and a trainer and you have a background doing training in corporations. But really what you are is you're an expert on culture. Let's just start off. Why is that even important? Why in 2018, when I can click my way to anything, do I even care about culture in a company?
It's funny. One of the things we talk about a lot with culture is we read all the articles, and I have a lot of people I've worked with who kind of lead by Harvard Business Review article. And so they go and they read the latest article and it's like, oh, we got to do this. I read about how these are the 4 steps we have to take. And then the next week it's like, oh no, there's only 5 steps this week. And then it's back to the one thing you need to know the following week, because we just keep looking at what we can adopt from other companies. What we can adopt from other people. Even when I work with speakers on the culture and environment they're creating with the audiences, we go and we look at what did someone do in a TEDx video, and I'll just do that. And what I find is that over and over, adopting something doesn't work because you've got all these interesting little personalities that you put together in your company or on your team or with the groups of clients you work with, like you said. And that has to come from somewhere more authentic, and it has to come from somewhere a little more meaningful, because culture is really just about the experience that we repetitively create for other people. And you can't read your way. Well, I shouldn't say you can't read your way to that because I'm putting out a book on it. But you can't.
Yeah, in the past, you couldn't read your way to it. But as of May, you actually can if you buy Culture for Dummies.
I love it. You know what? The reason I wanted to write the company Culture for Dummies was because the approach of those books is that it's not a lot of theory, that it's like, hey, go try this out and see what happens. And so for me as a first book, it was interesting to me because I could tell people, here's a little bit of stuff you need to know. And now here's things you go do them and see what you can create for yourself versus saying there's only one way to do it, which was important to me.
Well, so here's an interesting thing that kind of dovetails on what you said there in the beginning, and that is a lot of people, the culture of their business is their boss reads a Harvard Business Journal article or he reads a book, and the culture is now for the next 3 months we're going to emulate whatever he has read about sales or marketing or culture or whatever. And it's so often like I will talk to somebody after I give a speech at a conference, and an employee will come up to me and goes, "Oh my God, my boss was in the audience, and now we're going to have to implement everything you said for the next 2 months till he goes to the next conference." And so, that's the culture that they have, is they just are like, "Ooh, there's a shiny object. Let's run over there. Ooh, there's a shiny object. Let's go that other way." So tell me a little bit more about what is your business? How does Mike make money? What do you do as an entrepreneur?
Yeah. So, the biggest thing is speaking and training. So doing half-day workshops, full-day workshops, speaking, longer term engagements with groups. So I'm sticking around longer and helping them put some stuff into play. But I go in and I talk about culture and story because I think those two things go together. I grew up in the hospitality industry, in the airlines and hotels and restaurants. And I loved it because we were constantly just obsessed with creating experiences for people. And experiences are just a string of stories put together. And so for me, that when I went out on my own about 4 years ago to do consulting, it started to be that I was giving the same advice all the time, which is, well, what story do you want people to tell? Whether it was somebody designing their new onboarding experience for like a new hire on their first day, or whether it was they're opening a new brand and they're thinking about the customer. I kept saying, what do you want them to leave and go tell? When they go home to mom tonight, or they go home to Bay tonight, or whatever they do, what do you want them to say? And then let's work backwards from that and kind of storyboard it out. And so I started getting to where culture for me wasn't about a bunch of HR things put together, that it was really about... And it wasn't about ping pong tables or slides or nap rooms in the office either, because
I want a slide.
Could you imagine you just slide into the beginning of each podcast episode?
If I would only work in a video podcast, though, if I slide in on this podcast, people will be like, "What was that swishing noise that sounded like a fat ass in jeans going down a slide?"
I love it. But I realized that none of those things were what it took, and that it took more than that. And so what started clicking for me is that, it's actually these stories we tell, and learning to craft the stories and learning to over and over repetitively be able to deliver on those stories so that people did say those things. And so that got really interesting to me. And so now I travel, I speak at conferences, I speak to organizations, I do workshops on that, helping people figure out what is the story we want people to say, or what are the stories our employees are saying. Honestly, that's where we start a lot of times. And then we go backwards to say, well, which part of that do we not like? Which part of that do we love and we want to kind of codify so we can get more of it? And I do that. I also, in addition to that, for a long time, I was in the world of improv. I studied at Second City and Improv Olympic and Upright Citizens Brigade. And so that obviously gets brought into the story stuff a lot. And so I teach public speaking and performance with Michael and Amy Port through Heroic Public Speaking. I'm one of the performance coaches at TEDx Cambridge, and that's still about story. It's ultimately you're creating a culture with your audience. And so whether you have 11 minutes on TEDx stage or an hour in a workshop or a keynote, what is the story you're creating on stage, and what is the relationship and culture you're creating? And so that's what I bop around the country talking about.
So you're not a very old gentleman. Is this something like when you were 13, you said, I want to work for myself. I want to have my own business. But I looked at your bio. You did start off in corporate America. You were doing corporate training for restaurants and other types of other types of companies. So did you always know when you were working, in a company that I could go do this for myself?
I think I found an email. I found a really old email that I had sent to a friend when I was working at Potbelly Sandwich Shop. I was a trainer there and became the head of training there. And I found this email when I was leaving to go to another corporate. And I said, I wish that there was a job where you could just do workshops all day, where you should just teach the stuff, And I don't know how people do that. I guess they have to get famous. And I didn't realize it was a job you could have. And I kind of stumbled into it because I went to the next place and I taught wine and I was a sommelier. And then I went to the next place and I was head of operations and training. And then finally I was a partner. And then when I left, I kind of fell into consulting because I was, talking to somebody who was growing their brand. They were growing their retail brand and they were going to another state. And I was like, I probably had a little too much wine. And I was like, well, here's what you got to do. You got to figure this out. And you got to tell them that. And you got to do this. And you got to make this story. And he invited me in and said, oh, what would it cost to work with you? And I was like, I don't know.
$1.95 and a chicken dinner.
Seriously. I was like, can I have some free juice? I don't know. And so I went home, I remember, and I was like, I think I need a business card. I think I'm a consultant. Isn't that what you do? I need to hang the shingle. And so that led me to it. So I knew that I always wanted to do this work where I could speak and train and go help people. And I knew that I didn't love doing it inside of a company because it's all I wanted to do. I didn't want to do any of the other stuff that you have to do.
Yeah, the TPS reports are a big pain in the
Right. I didn't want to do that. And so I didn't realize, I kind of fell into it. And then that consulting led to a workshop because somebody said, oh, can you come do consulting? And I was like, I don't really want to turn in anything. I don't want the deliverables. So can I come and do it? I didn't say that to them, but I said, I
don't really want to do work. I just want the big check.
Right. Can I just come talk to you for a little bit? It's so much better. And I said, hey, here's the deal. If I come and do this work, you're going to need me again in 6 months. So why don't I come and teach your core team how to do this work? And we'll do these whiteboard strategy sessions where I'll teach them what I know so they can replicate it. And they said, oh, that sounds great. One of those people left and ended up going to an association and called me and said, hey, we'd love for you to come speak at our conference. And here's the honorarium. And I was so naive that I was like, oh, gosh, I have to pay them? I thought that I had to pay them because I thought you had to be like an author. You had to be famous to get paid to speak. So I was about to write back and be like, I don't think I'm a good fit. And I Googled honorarium and I was like, wait, they want to pay me? And then that was where I got curious and said, can I make a thing of this?
So a couple things you've said, we have a couple things in common. That's the way I ended up becoming a speaker is I was the marketing director for a big national law firm. And they started sending me all around the country, teaching the lawyers how to be more engaged in the community, how to network, how to volunteer, why, what types of people to spend your time with. And I was in the Washington, D.C. office of the firm, and one of the partners said to me, why do you work for us? And I kind of thought it was an insult, like, why, you're such a clown. And I was like, well, I actually have this job as the marketing director for Austin and Dallas. And, I did this seminar and they sent me all over the country. He goes, no, you misunderstand. I'm not saying you weren't good. I'm saying you're great. Why do you work for us? Why don't you just go and do this? He said, I'm 15 years as a lawyer. I've never been in a seminar that was this good that wasn't legal skills. It was just business skills training. He goes, why don't you just go do that? And I literally looked at him. I go, I don't think that's a thing. And I said, I think you have to be famous. And he said, no, it's a thing. My brother-in-law used to be part of this thing called the National Speakers Association. And I'm like, huh? And he goes, look it up. And so I did. And, as they say, the rest is history. I'd love to say I walked in and quit the next day. It took me 7 years to figure it out. But, I've now been doing it for 9 years. So that was one thing in common. The second thing in common is that you said you're a sommelier. So that's something you didn't know about me. I'm a big wine drinker, so we have that in common. You thought I was going to say I was a sommelier. That would have involved studying.
I love that. Oh my gosh, so much studying.
I know.
So much studying.
No, that's why I just drink the wine. I don't want to test. I don't want to be, I would be over wine if somebody tested me on it.
Yeah. So well, it's really interesting because you go through this process of becoming a sommelier and you become so obsessed with it that it becomes, for a period of time, it becomes slightly less of an enjoyable thing. Like there were times when I would go out to dinner and it's like, I just want a beer. Like, give me a margarita, give me a beer. I can't possibly think about wine. And then because there were days where I would taste 20 wines. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know that doesn't sound so rough.
Poor Mike. Oh, there were days I drank 20 wines. Oh, well, it's kind of like I used to be a professional photographer and I loved photography. And then I became a professional photographer. And now I rarely take pictures I'm not a photographer anymore because I got burned out on it. So now that you've been doing this for a while, you left corporate America and you became, Mike the entrepreneur. What do you love about this lifestyle? You know what?
I went into this because I I was obsessed originally with how we create experiences for people and how those experiences really do start with the stories we craft. The stories we craft at work, the stories we craft on stage, the stories we craft as leaders. And so that was really interesting to me. And the thing I love the most about this work is that I get to experience so many of those stories because I'm not just in one place. I'm no longer, just part of one team somewhere. I'm seeing so many people out in the world. And there's this thing when I work with somebody or a team of people, and they finally say, oh, that's the story people are saying. That's so interesting. We love that story. How do we leverage it? Or they say, I didn't realize that's what people were saying. And it isn't intentional. That's a mistake. That's how the thing that I'm getting people to feel and say is not what I wanted them to feel or say. And it's a misunderstanding because of the way I'm communicating. And so I can shift that. And it's really, really, really freaking cool to see a team of people become aware of what other people are saying when they go home at night and then be able to come back the next day and make small shifts to that, because it doesn't involve this huge cultural revolution sometimes of like, we got to change everything. We need trainings and we need workshops and we need rollouts and we need 7 months of visions and values and all of that work. It's like tomorrow come in and act slightly different and see if you can create a better thing. And so getting to go around the country and the world, I guess. I went to Canada once, so I could say world, right?
Yeah, you want to be one of those speakers. I'm an international speaker. I spoke in Puerto Rico. And I'm like,
yes.
You realize, I had someone tell me that. I'm now an international speaker. I spoke in Puerto Rico. And I go, you do, of course, realize that Puerto Rico is part of the United States. And she goes, well, Canada. And I'm like, oh, well, okay, you're totally international.
Totally international. I did do something in Argentina and Spain though, so maybe I can claim this.
So I've been to France, and while there, I used the spoken word like when ordering a baguette, and so I'm sure I could say I was a speaker in France because I ordered a baguette and they gave me one. So clearly, I was speaking in France.
That's like the greatest joke in our industry, right? It's like I once walked by the theater where someone did something, so I can say I've shared the stage.
I've been on the same stage, as so-and-so. Yeah, I shared. My favorite is people, they speak at one of these conferences with like 2,000 people where 2 speakers are paid and 1,998 are free. And it'll be like, Jack Canfield was the paid keynoter. And they're like, oh, I shared the stage with Jack Canfield. He was on 4 days before me and was home before I ever arrived in town, but I shared the stage with him.
Right. He had several bodyguards and a large moat between us.
Yeah, that's right. But I'm just like him. So.
But I took a selfie from 100 feet away.
That's right. Hey, so what advice do you have then for people who are listening to this thinking, I want to go out and do my own thing. I have this same calling that I should be doing what I do for myself. What would you tell people to do?
The first thing I would tell people to do is there's something about when you start to do it and then you realize it's not as easy as I'll just go deliver. Especially in the beginning, there's a point where you can get to that where you're like, hey, I'm a rock star speaker and I just get paid to deliver and somebody handles everything else. But there's a lot of work in the beginning around selling yourself. And sometimes we get obsessed with this idea of the thing that I really love is what everyone else is going to love. But it's not commercial. It's not a product that people are looking to buy. So if you're thinking of like, I want to go out there, whether you want to go out there and be a speaker or be a trainer or lead workshops, write a book, or start a new accounting firm somewhere, I think you've really, really got to assess what does the marketplace want? Unless you're independently wealthy and you just can travel around and do this for fun. But if you want a business, if you want to practice, then I think you need to look and say, what is an issue that people are facing that I can help with? And the more succinct and the more clear you can be on that, the more bookable you are. Whether you're trying to book yourself as, an accountant, whether you're opening a restaurant, or whether you're trying to go on the road as a speaker and trainer, you've really got to think about what is the itch that I'm scratching for people and how clearly can I speak about that so that people know exactly what they're getting from me. Because I see so many people get started and they're not clear on that. And then they struggle for years because they haven't gotten clear on what is commercially viable.
So there's a lot of people who start things, whatever it is. Like you said, it could be a restaurant, it could be an accounting firm, it could be a consultancy, whatever. And when they start, they feel like they're so full of potential. It's like, oh, I've got all this stuff. Everybody can be my client. I'm going to do this. And then in the reality for many people, not everybody, is they fall short of that. I always say that potential does not equal results. And, we get really excited about potential, but potential doesn't mean anything. It's like people always say, oh, knowledge is power. I don't think that's true, especially in 2018. I think knowledge is just potential. I mean, we all have access on our phone to the knowledge of everything we could ever want in whatever industry we're in. That doesn't mean we're going to have results. So knowledge isn't really power. Knowledge is potential. Action is what gets you there. But why do you think so many entrepreneurs fall short of their potential and either fail or just get stuck in what I call the high middle? They just never go anywhere.
Yeah, I think, I'm going to relate it back to story. I think they're missing two key stories here. The first is, what is the story of the person they want to serve? What are they struggling with so specifically that you can say, I know what your current world looks like, and it looks like this, so that the person listening says like, oh my gosh, that is awful. You're right. I hate this world. I need to fix that. And so it goes back to what I was just saying around really understanding what is the problem so clearly that you could define it for them, and they listen and they say, ooh, yes, that's me. I don't like it. And the more that you can kind of say, let's get really specific about it, so the person gets so uncomfortable with like, yeah, I don't like this current world, then the better. And then you can use that story in your marketing. You can use it in your messaging. You can use it as you design your website to be really clear about what are you feeling now. So someone reads it and says, yes, this person gets me. That's what I'm struggling with. And then the second one is the story around what happens after you. So I've decided this is the person for me. And so what happens? What is the solution around my problem, and how am I living afterwards? So sometimes we get obsessed with this idea of helping people find their passion. Somebody will come and say, I want to get started as a speaker, and what do I do? And here's my big dream. I'm going to be on a yacht, and I'm going to take Instagrams with famous celebrities like Jack Canfield when I share the stage with him.
From 40 moats away, yeah.
Right, with 7 bodyguards in the middle. And the reality is that that's just not sure, that might be helpful for you to keep you going. And I'm a big believer in having that vision. But I think what's more important, and the reason that people don't get action, is because they're not really clear about the current story that their customers are living and the story their customers want to live. And the more clear we can get on that, the better we can get at describing it, speaking about it, and developing products, speeches, trainings, and services to give them what they want.
So Mike, I want to dive a little deeper into this whole idea of story and relate it back to company culture.
Yeah.
But first, I actually have to thank the other sponsor of this episode. So this episode is brought to you by Podfly Productions. Podfly takes the time and the headache out of creating your own podcast. They set you up with the right equipment, training, and guidance to ensure that you sound amazing. Podfly does all the heavy lifting and that crazy technical work so that you can focus on creating great content, growing your audience, and interviewing real cool people like Mike Ganino. Hey, if you want to start a podcast, and I know some of you do, jump over to podfly.net/cool things and check out the offer they have for the listeners of this show. So Mike, you're this expert on culture, and you've taught it inside companies in your training. You've gone out as a consultant. You've spoken at conferences. What does an entrepreneur really need to know? Why does he care about culture? Or why does she want to make sure she develops the right culture in her company?
Yeah. Culture is one of those things that could be super fad-like right now.
Come on, it sounds a little fluffy. Like, oh, we're all about culture. Yay.
Yeah. And for me, it's, there's that famous saying, I don't know who said it, because these things are, I think it was Peter Drucker, that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I actually think culture is strategy. Culture is part of the strategy, and they can't be separated. So here's the deal. In the book that comes out soon, I spent 360 pages making the case for the fact that culture is really the thing you need regardless of what you want. And so a lot of times when a new company will come and say, hey, we want to work with you on our culture, I'll ask them specifically, like, what is the business problem that's going on? What's wrong because of the culture? And a lot of times it's surprising to people at first, because what they want to do is like, no, we wanted to know, like, how many catered lunches should we do a week? Or we wanted to know what's wrong with all the employees that they're not engaged. And it's like, well, people aren't engaged because you aren't engaging. And so the place that I start is to say, what is the business problem you're having? Are you having lack of sales? Are you not able to recruit top talent? Are your customers angry about your product? Is your product team not able to develop products quick enough or innovatively enough, or not based on what your customers really want? And so I always start with saying, let's not fix this in a vacuum. Let's fix it in specific. And so the way that culture shifts is you look at groups of people working together and you say, how can we do that differently? And how can we create a new norm? Because culture is really just about the norms in your business. Do we give each other feedback or do we hold back? Do we share the wins in our life or do we stay in our little bubble? Do we step up and offer solutions or do we keep our solutions to ourselves because we keep getting shut down in meetings? Do I pick up the straw on the ground with my discretionary effort or do I pretend all of a sudden that I cannot see below my nose? All of those things come from culture. Culture is the conditions in the room, conditions in your business that get people to do certain actions. And so for me, I always say, let's start with your business results. And I think it's part of why I've been successful is that it then feels really real of like, wait, we're talking about sales. And it's like, yeah, your culture is why you're not getting sales. Let's go look at that. And then we uncover where it's like, oh, the salesperson didn't go that one extra step because they're like, nobody cares if I go an extra step. The service person on the line in your restaurant backs away from an engagement with a customer because they say, we don't do that around here. So culture is the key to getting any of those results.
So, I think that's fascinating because I do think that there's a lot of people who give a lot of lip service to culture, but when you're actually tying it to sales, most entrepreneurs perk up. I mean, I talk a lot about potential. I have this whole program I call the Paradox of Potential. And at first people are like, oh, catchy title. But when I pointed out that, 70% of the people I've interviewed say they don't think they're doing everything they can at work. And then I point out to an employer, what if those numbers are wrong? I mean, it's not a scientific survey. What if I'm off by, what if it's 50%? What if half your employees, then they don't bring this up in like a review. Nobody goes into their boss and says, yeah, I'm kind of phoning it in. I'm not doing everything I can around here. But in private and anonymously, they're saying, yeah, I'm just not reaching my potential. And sometimes they're blaming the boss. Sometimes it's internal. Sometimes it's environmental. But when we talk about what if everybody just got a little farther across that gap between potential, we don't have to get them all the way across the gap, but what if 50% of your employees all did just a little bit more? What would that do to your bottom line? And all of a sudden people kind of perk up and they go, oh, well, I want that for my bottom line. So I think you're doing the exact same thing by tying culture to sales. All of a sudden it becomes very real and very motivational for the people who control, that budget line.
Yeah. And it's not a far leap when you start to say, when I sit down at the table and say, okay, so let's look at this. Let's look at how culture and sales are related. And then you can just go into, I go into storytelling mode about like, let's imagine a scene with your salesperson. And this happens with the client and they take this action because it feels like, I don't really know the person on the account side. So I'm not going to reach out and ask a specific question for this client because I don't like the way the account team interacts with me. So I'm just going to not ask the question. And you don't get the sale. Or what about if you do get the sale because the salesperson says, I'm going to wing it because I don't know the answer. And I know that when I ask on Slack or when I email the accounts team, they're kind of short with me. And so I'd rather not deal with them. So I'm just going to wing it. And then that customer ends up not happy. So it's not that far of a leap to say, this really is super connected.
So, Mike, I call this show Cool Things Entrepreneurs Do. What is the coolest thing you're doing right now?
The coolest thing I'm doing right now is, I don't know if this is cool or crazy. I'm working on the everything for the second book because I realized all the stuff I didn't put in the first one. And so the second book will be around this idea of culture and story specifically. And so what I'm doing right now is starting to talk to people and interview them to pull these stories from organizations and from experts and leaders. And that's super cool because I'm just learning a bunch of stuff. So often when I'm on stage or when I'm training, I'll hear little snippets. If I'm in a training session and I have people talking, I'll hear little bits, but I don't get to deep dive into like, what is going on? How did you start this? When you were pitching your company, what did you say to people? What was the happily ever after version of your company and how has that turned out? And so probably a lot like you doing the show, it's really, really interesting and cool to learn all of these different things that matter to people and find the motivations of why they did. Because you can't find that a lot of times on the website. The website of a company is too marketing driven.
Well, and now that I've done, 343 episodes and well over 300 interviews, I'm starting to let the secret out. it's really all about like having my own personal university. People like you come on and become my professor for 30 minutes. And I am just smarter than I was 3.5 years ago because I get to talk to so many cool people. I had a client, a meeting planner, say to me the other day, it was as if you learned as much as we did during that presentation because it was very interactive. And I interviewed the audience for sort of, what they were struggling with. And she's like, you were learning as much as we were. And I thought, I don't think you're supposed to know that, but yes, that's exactly what happens when I do interactive presentations. So I think, Mike, though, that entrepreneurs, I think they're great observers. So I love to ask this question: who do you see out there? Because we can talk about Mike and company culture for dummies and the new book that'll come out next year or the year after. We could talk about that all day long. But I think that it's fun to ask entrepreneurs: who do you see out there where you say that entrepreneur, they're the one doing something cool?
Wow, this is a really good question. I have so many neat people that I get to watch. Honestly, I'm going to say this, and I listened to the episode that you did recently with Neen James. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I love, she has a book coming out or has come out by the time this is, called Attention Pays. And one of the things I love is she didn't just do lip service to like, let me go talk about my theory and put in some basic examples. She's like doing heavy research on finding out all the things we think about, what's wrong with them, like the statements we make. I know in the episode with you, she talked about the goldfish comment.
Oh yeah, because people now have an attention span shorter than a goldfish. And yeah. I know that's not true from research I've done. And I said that to her and she was funny because I didn't realize I was hitting a button. She's like, we do not have attention span shorter than a goldfish. Although she said it with such a cute Australian accent. But, it was kind of one of those things that, that's like a hot button for her, is that people make all these things up about lack of attention for people or for millennials, and then it just becomes sort of accepted in the norm. And so I love that episode. If listeners, if you haven't gone back, it's like maybe 4 or 5 episodes before this one. If you go back and listen to the interview with Neen James, you'll find out a little bit more about how you pay attention and why it matters.
Yeah. And so what I love about what she's doing is she isn't just saying, I'm putting a book out here and I'm going to study this for a little bit of time so I can go on stage, but like hired a research company to like take a deep dive and research what's true in this, what's not. They're doing studies. And so I think that's super cool because it just shows a whole different level of commitment to this topic. So I really love that. I think that's pretty cool thing because I don't see that a lot in our industry where people are that committed to getting the right information.
No, I think that's a great example. And she is one to admire. She does cool things. Hey, the last question I ask everybody is, I think that entrepreneurs want to do more than just make money. I think they want to somehow leave a mark. So what do you do to serve the greater good?
What do I do to serve the greater good? I mean, two really specific things. One is that I carve out a specific amount of gigs every year, days on my calendar, where I go and work with groups that I really love, that I think are doing cool things. This last year, I have two nieces who are 7 years old. So, I'm a son and a brother of a sister, and very close with my grandma and my aunt, and I was kind of raised by women. So this whole Me Too movement lately has been, not especially touching to me because I was always with women. I was surrounded by women my whole life. And I have these two nieces and I see how they interact with the world. And so one of the groups that I've worked with is Girls Inc. Mm-hmm. And Girls Inc. is this national foundation that works with young girls, like elementary school girls. And so I've done a bunch of work with not with the girls themselves, but with the people leading the group to kind of help them figure out why are they doing it and connect with the stories of why do I show up and volunteer. And that's been really, really fun and rewarding. And so I carve out in my calendar a specific number of days where I do work like that. And so that's probably the biggest thing that I'm doing to kind of give back. And honestly, it's like you go on those big stages and it's like, oh, this is so cool. Lights and camera and action. And I'm, 40 feet away from where Jack Canfield once stood. But sometimes it's like a dingy little room in an office where these people are making a difference and showing up and working with 10 women on the story of why they're here. And that's pretty freaking cool.
Yeah. No, well, as the father of 2 daughters, I applaud that. So that's awesome. Hey, Mike, I know the book is coming out very soon. If somebody's listening to that and they need to know more about you, they need to know more about company culture for dummies, how do they find you? How do they find the book? Tell them every single way that they can connect with you.
Oh gosh, we would need another hour of every single way. I think the hub of all things is at MikeGanino.com. If you Google Mike Ganino, I'm the one that's going to show up. And the book is super easy to find on Amazon and everywhere else. It's Company Culture for Dummies, and so super easy to find. And then again, MikeGanino.com, and then that'll lead you to all the other places. If you want to tweet me, Instagram me, Pinterest me, whatever you want to do to me, you can find it all at MikeGanino.com, and we'll connect there.
All right, so everybody jump over to MikeGanino.com and make sure that you connect with Mike. Mike, you were a great guest. Thank you for coming and playing here on Cool Things Entrepreneurs Do.
Thank you for having me. And one of the cool things entrepreneurs get to do is talk to Tom Singer. So thanks for having me on the show.
Well, from your lips to God's ears. So, and thank you for everybody who listened, whether this is your first show or, you've been listening for a long time. Thank you. I say it every episode. If it wasn't for the audience, there'd be no show. So I appreciate everything that you guys do. I appreciate you telling your friends. I appreciate the people who go and leave reviews on iTunes. That just makes my day brighter. So why would you cheat me from that? Go. It takes a minute. Go leave a review on iTunes. And if you would like to follow us on Facebook, it's Cool Things Entrepreneurs Do. If you want to find me on Twitter, it's @CoolPodcast. And if you want to join the group coaching program, the Potential Mastermind Project, there is a lot of good stuff going on there. And now is the time to join because we still have 3 quarters left this year where you can get closer to that potential, get across that gap, man. Hey, we're going to be back in a couple of days with an interview with somebody just as cool as Mike Ganino. I know you're thinking, Tom, how will you ever find somebody as cool as Mike? But we will. And so we'll see you then. But in the meantime, I challenge you, go on out there and have a great day.
Thank you for being part of the Cool Things Entrepreneurs Do podcast. Without your participation and listening to these conversations, there is no show. Connect with Tom at TomSinger.com and follow him on Twitter at TomSinger.